Hello, my name is Roy Beiswinger, and I want to talk to you about the Sport Pilot certification and privileges in the FAA MOSAIC rule proposal. The focus here is on the FAA discussion of model-specific endorsement for aircraft certificated with the Simplified Flight Controls designation. This is going to be from Section 61.9, 61.31, 61.415, and 61.429. In a description, you will find a link to the FAA's Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, NPRM, as well as links to other resources. Remember, I'm just letting you know what is in the NPRM. By reading the FAA's words, I'm not necessarily endorsing the FAA's text or methods. In fact, I'm wanting you to listen closely to their words because these are the rules you will have to live under. This is meant to be a class on the document. I refer you to the original document for precise language. Let's continue the discussion on Sport Pilot certification and privileges. So that you get the scope of everything in this overall section, here is the list of individual items. Again, here in MOSAIC number 22, we'll talk about just one area. Model-specific endorsement for aircraft certificated with a Simplified Controls designation, sections 61.9, 61.31, 61.415, and 61.429. And here it is. The title of the section is, again, Model-specific endorsements for aircraft certificated with a Simplified Controls designation, Section 61.9, 61.31, 61.415, and 61.429. As discussed in another section of this preamble, the FAA is proposing to establish a Simplified Controls designation in proposed Section 22.180. Aircraft with a Simplified Flight Controls design and designation would not have traditional flight controls available to the pilot. Currently, the FAA does not have a regulatory mechanism to require flight training and an instructor endorsement to validate proficiency for pilots seeking to operate aircraft certificated with a Simplified Flight Controls designation. The FAA recognizes that Simplified Flight Control designs will vary from one aircraft to another, for example, model to model. As such, piloting would not involve the commonality of experience that exists in aircraft with traditional flight controls. Therefore, it is important that a pilot be qualified and validate competency for each Simplified Flight Control make and model of aircraft to validate competency in that unique design. Furthermore, aircraft with Simplified Flight Control designations may be operated by pilots other than sport pilots, resulting in the same safety concerns for pilots with higher grades of pilot certificates. Therefore, any qualification requirements to address the Simplified Flight Control systems must apply broadly to persons who hold pilot certificates based under Part 61. Thus, the FAA proposes this qualification for Simplified Flight Controls be attained by a training and endorsement and, in some cases, a practical test. This section describes the requirements for pilots to act as pilot in command of an aircraft with a Simplified Flight Controls designation. The next section further describes scenarios pertaining to practical tests where, 1. A person seeks a pilot certificate in an aircraft with Simplified Flight Controls. 2. A person has a pilot certificate with a Simplified Flight Controls model-specific limitation and seeks to operate another model of aircraft category and class with a Simplified Flight Controls designation. And 3. A person has a pilot certificate not limited to flight controls. For example, the person can act as pilot in command of an aircraft with traditional flight controls, but seeks to obtain privileges as pilot in command of a make and model with a Simplified Flight Controls designation. Due to the differing characteristics, as previously discussed, the FAA finds that adding training specific to the particular make and model of aircraft with a Simplified Flight Controls designation is necessary to ensure a pilot is sufficiently proficient in the operation of that aircraft. Therefore, the FAA proposes to amend Section 61.31 by adding new paragraph L to contain the qualification requirements for persons seeking to act as pilot in command of any aircraft with a Simplified Flight Control designation. Specifically, proposed Section 61.31L1 would require pilots seeking to act as pilot in command of aircraft certificated with a Simplified Flight Controls designation to obtain model-specific training in that aircraft from an authorized instructor. Additionally, proposed Section 61.31L2 would require the pilot to receive a logbook endorsement from an authorized instructor who has found the pilot proficient in the safe operation of that model-specific aircraft and the associated simplified flight control system. The FAA's proposal would permit any certificated pilot, regardless of certificate level, who holds the appropriate category and class to operate a simplified flight control designated aircraft only after receiving the model-specific training and endorsement from an authorized flight instructor specific to the safe operation of each simplified flight control designated aircraft. The authorized instructor in proposed Section 61.31L may be a Subpart H instructor or a sport pilot instructor. Before an instructor may provide flight training in an aircraft with a simplified flight controls designation, the instructor would be required to first receive the model-specific training and accompanying endorsement to validate that the instructor is proficient in the safe operation of the aircraft. Because this would be a limitation in the Sport Pilot Instructor Logbook until the Sport Pilot Instructor meets certain conditions, the FAA is proposing to amend current Section 61.415 by adding new paragraph M. Proposed Section 61.415M would expressly limit the sport pilot instructor from providing training in an aircraft with simplified controls, design, and designation unless the sport pilot has received the model-specific training and endorsement required under Section 61.31L. Additionally, the FAA is proposing an amendment to current Section 61.429, which contains the requirements for a Subpart H instructor seeking to exercise the privileges of a flight instructor certificate with a sport pilot rating. Specifically, the FAA is proposing to add new paragraph D to current Section 61.429 to state that a Subpart H instructor seeking to exercise the privileges of their flight instructor certificate in a model-specific aircraft that has a simplified flight controls designation must meet the training and endorsement requirements specified in proposed Section 61.31L before providing any flight training in the aircraft. Initially, there would be no flight instructors who are qualified to provide flight training in an aircraft that has a simplified flight controls designation because the training and endorsement requirements in proposed Section 61.31L are new. Thus, no one has yet received the training or endorsement necessary to act as pilot in command. The FAA is proposing to add new paragraph M to current Section 61.195 to address this issue. The FAA intends for proposed Section 61.195M to provide the initial cadre of flight instructors with an alternative to the training and endorsement requirements in proposed Section 61.31L to enable industry to build the initial cadre of flight instructors who could provide the training and endorsement for aircraft with simplified flight control designations. Specifically, proposed Section 61.195M would permit instructor pilots that work with the manufacturer of aircraft with the simplified flight controls designation to provide training and endorsements to the initial cadre of authorized instructors and pilot examiners. This proposed provision would allow for the initial operation of aircraft with the simplified flight controls designation during and after the aircraft certification process for these new aircraft. An instructor pilot at the manufacturer for the aircraft would be one of the only individuals with significant experience operating the model-specific aircraft with simplified flight controls. Additionally, the instructor pilots are generally tasked with developing and validating training for the aircraft for the manufacturer. The FAA finds that the duties of an instructor pilot establish intricate knowledge of the aircraft systems and components. The FAA has determined that it would be beneficial to leverage the experience these instructor pilots have to create the initial cadre of authorized instructors who may provide training under proposed Section 61.31L. To mitigate any safety risk that may result from allowing an instructor pilot to provide training in a model-specific aircraft, the FAA has decided to narrowly confine the training population to include only Subpart H instructors. Thus, the FAA is proposing the provisions as a limitation to the flight instructor certificate pursuant to Section 61.195 and not to sport pilot instructors. Because an instructor pilot would have significant experience in the model-specific aircraft and the training population would be narrowly confined, the FAA finds that proposed Section 61.195M would not adversely affect safety. In developing this proposal, the FAA recognized that any aeronautical experience obtained in an aircraft with a simplified flight controls designation would not be equal to the aeronautical experience obtained piloting aircraft with traditional flight controls. However, because aircraft with simplified flight controls designation would fall into the same category and class of aircraft as aircraft with traditional flight controls, pilots could seek to build time for the higher certificates and ratings in much more simplistic aircraft. The FAA finds that aeronautical experience in aircraft with simplified flight control designations would diminish the aeronautical experience in aircraft with traditional flight controls that is necessary to reinforce piloting skills in traditionally equipped aircraft. With that understanding, the FAA is proposing that any pilot time acquired while operating an airplane or helicopter with a simplified flight controls design and designation may not be used to satisfy certain pilot and command flight time requirements for a higher grade certificate. Those pilot time experience limitations can be found in newly proposed Section 61.9. For example, under proposed 61.9b, a person seeking a commercial pilot certificate with a rotorcraft category helicopter class rating may not use flight time acquired in a helicopter with simplified flight control designation to meet the pilot and command flight time experience requirement in Section 61.129C2I, which requires 35 hours of pilot and command time in a helicopter. Pilot and command experience in a helicopter with a simplified flight controls does not provide the same skills and experience a commercial pilot needs to conduct commercial operations in a helicopter with traditional flight controls that include unique skills like the conduct of an auto rotation. Once a pilot obtains a helicopter class rating on their commercial pilot certificate, the pilot has commercial pilot privileges in many legacy helicopters as a general matter. It is therefore important for an applicant seeking a helicopter class rating on a commercial pilot certificate to continue to obtain the class-specific pilot and command flight time in a helicopter that has traditional flight controls. Thanks for making it all the way to the end of this video. Here are a couple things I believe are worth mentioning about this. It's great that the FAA is acknowledging simplified controls. Whether anyone realizes it or not, a goal from NASA is to make pilots obsolete. The way it was put in a seminar I attended was that NASA wanted to see pilots dumbed down to operators and the operators becoming just users, or something along those lines. Of course, none of the people wanting to make pilots obsolete were pilots themselves. But this is obviously the way of the future. Most automobile drivers can't drive anything but an automatic transmission anymore. But there are a couple of problems with the FAA's approach. First, the FAA seems to ignore the fact that simplified controls means that the aircraft equipped with them may not require a pilot to be specifically trained in them. Just like someone who knows how to drive a car with a manual transmission doesn't need training in how to operate a vehicle with an automatic transmission, making it more difficult for pilots and potential pilots to get access to flight instructors for aircraft with simplified controls seems counterproductive. And that's it for MOSAIC number 22. Please comment and like the video if you got value from it. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe so you can get more of the good stuff. Thanks so much for watching, and blue skies.